Hello, welcome back to our weekly reflection. And of course, it's the year of Matthew's Gospel. Now, the parable today that we're taking in Matthew's Gospel is about the generous employer. It's the whole story of where those that get employed who come late, those who come early, get paid the same amount. And this parable is only in Matthew's Gospel. So we're going to have a look at why would this parable only be in one Gospel? What sort of focus does it have? So Caitlin's going to do our reading now, and Caitlin's folks, both teachers, she's doing, I think her studies are in social work, community work, and so she's got a very good analysis of the issues of society around her. So let's listen to Caitlin take the reading now. That really is quite an intense reading in Matthew's Gospel.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus spoke this parable to his disciples. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire labourers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the labourers for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. When he went out about 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And he said to them, "You also go into the vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. When he went out again about noon and about 3 o'clock, he did the same. And about 5 o'clock he went out and found others standing around, and he said to them, "Why are you standing here idle all day?" They said to him, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You also go into the vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, "Call the labourers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and then going to the first." When those hired about 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage. Now when the first came, they thought they would receive more. But each of them also received the usual daily wage. And when they received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." But he replied to one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last the same as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I am generous?" So the last will be first, and the first will be last. The Gospel of the Lord.
So, the story told only once in the Gospels, a parable about the generous employer. And you notice in the story that he negotiates with the labourers that they will be paid a certain amount of money for working for the day. The problem comes at sundown, when those that were employed in the middle of the day and those almost at a late hour are also paid the same money, and the grumbling begins. And there's a beautiful line in one translation where the master says, "Why be envious? Because I am generous." They all got paid fairly. It was just that the grumble was, we've worked longer than them, even though we're all being paid the same wage. But the thing is, we expected to get more, or they should have got less than us because they only worked much shorter hours than ourselves. I suspect that the context of this parable, only in Matthew, is because Matthew has a preoccupation patient with dealing with a pastoral situation where there's dissatisfaction, there's grumbling, and there's nastiness between the synagogue people and the people of the house church. What I've been saying all along as we track through this wonderful gospel is it's all to do with Matthew assuring those that have left the synagogue and the temple that they are not cut off from the riches of their long Jewish tradition and its great history, that they have brought the treasures with them. On the other hand, the people who have stayed in the Jewish tradition are sniping at the followers of the Nazarene because they regard them as heretics and as tragic, inadequate sorts of people. Do you get the point? That what the parable's getting at is that the one who presides over all of this harvest and our life and our work is the one who gives generously to all. And there's almost a feeling like, so you stop being nasty to one another. Recognize that on either side, whether it's synagogue or house church, that the God who provides for us is a God that we hold in awe. Some of the other clues that this really is a parable meant particularly for Jewish people and for Jewish converts is the all sorts of subtle references in the storyline to Jewish imagery. In the old tradition of Jewish history, the vine was regarded as the people of Israel. They trampled down my vine, is one of the sayings, that the vine was planted here. I loved its tender, so on. References to the vine. So they get invited to work in the vineyard. And then at the end of the day, the reckoning happens. How much do you get paid for what you have done? A subtle but clear reference to the end of time when the God of all ages will bring the nations together, and there shall be judgment upon all of our lives. And those that are faithful are recognized for this, and the giving out of justice is clearly part of the process of the moment in the parable. Now, it's interesting also that at the same time that Matthew has written this gospel, and they suspect either Matthew or some of the friends of Matthew have composed the parable, rather than Jesus. The reason for this is that it's only in one gospel, and the scholars tend to say that when a parable or an incident in the life of Jesus is recorded in more than one gospel, there's a likelihood that it was something that happened historically. Remember again, we're not dealing with diarized versions of the Lord's life. We're dealing with a presentation, a proclamation of his way and his teachings that will enable those who hear these things to live by them. In Paul's writings, that's earlier than Matthew, in fact earlier than most of the evangelist writings, In his letters, he talks about putting on the mind of Christ Jesus. Now, let's just look at this mindset. If we were treated like the labourers, we have every reason to protest, because if we start early, we get paid more. If we start late, we get paid less. But the master in the story gives a just wage at the beginning, and it's like affirmative action. In a way, he gives as much to the midday people as the late afternoon people. See, it's trying to get our heads around the fact that a gracious God, that one who is just, wise and sustaining, is there for all of us. And if only we could get our heads around this, there would be much more of an openness to religious views, to faith, to a life with God. But when we start to squabble over the way our minds tick, it tends to lead to envy, jealousy, injustice. So I find this unique parable in Matthew's Gospel possibly set in the context of squabbles between the synagogue and the house church, all of them Jewish, and some have gone over to the way of the Nazarene, himself Jewish. That the pastoral setting is trying to adjust to the goodness of God for all peoples, and that really has a significant place to be recognized in the religions, the traditions of our own time. Thank you for sharing. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.